Hi, I'm Helen and I'm a writer, and today's session is called Recipe for Writing, and I'm going to give you lots and lots of ideas for things to write, beginning with recipes, because of course food and cooking are such a rich source of sensory images. They have some super words that you can use to build stories and pieces and whatever you like, and as usual there are no rules about what you need to write. It's up to you. It can be what we call life writing, memoir about yourself. It can be poetry. It can be descriptive pieces. It can be a story. Anything you like, anything goes. So let's start with breaking the blank sheet, because it's always horrible getting started. So you may want to pause the video at this point. I'm going to ask you for a list of words to do with cooking, like fry, bake, those kinds of things. So where we apply heat to food, see what you can come up with. So you may want to pause now while you write your list. Here are some of the suggestions that I've got. Toast, grill, griddle, shallow fry, deep fry, boil, steam, simmer, sear, scorch, sauté, soften, bake, roast, wilt. You might want to write a list of preparation words for cooking, because they're really good in writing. So things like rinse, wash, soak, remove, chop, cut, dice, slice, quarter, half, juice, press, blend, combine, mix, stir, sieve, sift, beat, whisk, fold in, drip, drop, spoon, pour, knead, roll out, flatten. And that's just in the preparation of the food. Describing what food tastes like is a whole other area. We tend to use smell mostly when we're describing food, but the taste can be used as well. So for example, honeyed, sweet, sour, peppery, spicy, citrusy, smooth, sharp, crunchy, gritty, paste, velvety, chocolate, fruity. And I haven't really started on the smell. That's mainly to do with taste. Okay, so once you've broken your blank sheet by writing a bit of a word bank of foods of food-related words that might help you get started, I'm going to suggest that you create a recipe, but rather than for an actual food, create a recipe for a concept. For example, a recipe for love, or a recipe to create happiness, or a recipe to create contentment or good luck, or even a recipe to make a curse. My suggestion is a recipe for a happy day. So to begin with in a recipe, you list your ingredients. So I would have a blue sky. I'd have the sound of hot water dripping onto the tea bag for my first cup of tea. I would have a baby's laughter. I would have the scent of lemon rind as you scrape it. I would have the scent of lavender and the velvety smoothness of chocolate. So here goes with my recipe. Step 1, reflect the sky in the puddles on the pavement. 2, blend the scents of lavender and lemon rind and pour in. 3, combine the laughter of the baby and the sound of your first cup of tea, dripping a little in at a time into the mixture. And finally, stir the chocolate in until a rainbow appears, and then sip slowly to enjoy your day. Now, if you look at writing by people who write about food or create recipes, they're pretty expressive in the words that they use and the way that they write. So you'll probably have your own favourite chefs, maybe people you've seen on the television or whatever. I find that Nigel Lawson goes completely over the top in her food descriptions, but that's fantastic because you could pinch some of her recipes or ideas. You could find them online or in her books, and you know, she writes really well about food, so she's a great example. I quite like an autobiography written by the chef Nigel Slater. It's called Toast, and it's written in lots of tiny little sections where he takes an item of food and then tells part of his life through that item of food. And one of the things that stuck in my mind was jelly beans. he associated jelly beans with being taken out for a family trip in his dad's car. So you might want to think of a food that has been significant in some way in your life and write about that, what you remember about it. My example would be boiled sweets, because when I was a child I used to get really bad travel sickness, and my parents, if we went out in the car, liked to take the scenic country routes with all the windy roads and all the rest of it, so I would get quite badly travel sick sitting in the back, and I would be bribed to not complain really by being given boiled sweets. And I remember the crackling sound as you unwrap the plastic, and then how they scratched your mouth at first and you had to keep sucking until they got really nice and smooth. And it gave me something other than feeling ill to concentrate on. The red ones were my favourites. So even now when I think of boiled sweets, it does remind me of childhood journeys in the car with my parents. Another memory you might like to write about is, you know, your favourite ever meal, or your best ever meal, or your most memorable meal. One of my favourites is from when my children were tiny, about 1 and 3, and we were having a holiday in Norfolk, and my husband had to come back here to work for a day, so we dropped him off at Sheringham Station at some ridiculous hour in the morning, and then I took the children onto the beach, and we had marmalade sandwiches, and we skimmed stones and we paddled, and it was just beautiful. It was May, I think, and not that warm, but there was a sort of pinky light in the sky, and the sea was calm as anything, and there was no one about. And those marmalade sandwiches were the best marmalade sandwiches I've ever had in my life, and I still remember them. So that might be something interesting to write about. The next thing you could try doing is to concoct a character using food, or several characters. So this is where you're going to be creative. So here's my example, and I will add it to the text that comes out with this video. His words are honeyed, but his eyes are bitter like dark chocolate. Half the time he's smooth and handsome, like the skin of an apple, but don't bite too far into his core. You might find him not to your taste. So see how you get on with concocting some characters, because once you've created people, then you can write stories about them. The next thing I did was to find some actual recipes. I pulled this out of the magazine that came with last weekend's paper, because it's got some interesting recipes, things that look far too complicated for me ever to cook, but some lovely words. Sublime, lovely, tender. Chuck some scrubbed new potatoes into the pan, fresh chestnuts, add more seasoning, lots and lots of interesting words and phrases. So if you were to pick one of your recipe books, or find a recipe from a newspaper, or go online, there are thousands of sites with recipes, and just randomly pick some interesting words. Here are some that I picked. And I can't see them because they're back to front in the video. So I've got blend, I've got pour, rolling boil, simmer, sharp, velvet, drip, wilt and soften. And here's the piece that I wrote using those words. And I tried not to mention food in this writing, so I tried to use the food generated words to write a story that wasn't about food. Wilting in the heat, she felt the sweat dripping and pooling between her shoulder blades. She'd run the whole way at a rolling boil, the worry simmering away inside her. When she saw the old woman, her words were sharper than she intended. "Sit down, dear, and let me bring you a cool glass of water," said her granny. She softened at this kindness. Soon all her worries were pouring out of her. Blended with the water and the velvet reassurance of Granny, everything felt so much better. So, very, very short story. I like very short stories. And here are some final suggestions for things you could write about using food imagery, food words, cooking descriptions, for things that might inspire a story. So you could make up a story about a day in the life of a chef. Could be like a magazine interview or something. Or you could write a story or a poem which takes place in a cafe or a restaurant or somewhere with something to eat. With our current restrictions, it's going to be outdoor eating and takeaway places and things like that. That might make an interesting sort of comparison, how things were and how things are at the moment. Write a story about a cookery competition. Did somebody cheat? Did somebody buy something ready-made and try to pass it off as their own? Did the person who came in second place get jealous of the person who came first? So that could be quite fun. Stories are always based on some kind of conflict. So if you can create an argument or a disagreement, then it's going to make an interesting story. Or you could write about the time you were served something you really didn't want to eat, but you were too polite to say anything, so you had to pretend to like it. Or you could write about having something you're not sure how to eat. You know, which knives, forks to use. If you have a lobster or something like that, they bring out all sorts of weird implements, you know, and if you don't know how to use them, which I don't, what are they for, those nutcracker things? Which bit are you supposed to crack with the nutcrackers? And if there's no one to ask for help, that could probably make quite a comic story. Write about the time perhaps you tasted some food that you'd always wanted to try, but it wasn't as nice as you expected and you didn't enjoy it. You could sort of do the tension building up as you get excited about trying this new thing. My best example of that is actually from my dad, who remembers when he was a small boy, he'd read in one of his favourite stories that they had bananas dipped in chocolate to eat. And this was just after the war. Bananas were hard to come by and chocolate was hard to come by. But his mum, my grandma, was amazing and managed to get, when it was his birthday, some chocolate to melt and a banana to dip it in. And of course, he thought it tasted disgusting. But it was only as an adult that he realised what he'd put his poor mum through. So that would make quite an interesting story in the telling. So I really look forward to descriptions, poetry about your favourite foods or foods you really can't bear. I look forward to stories that don't even mention food or eating, but that use the language of cookery and preparation and cooking, and I hardly touched on those. I look forward to stories where you've picked random words from an existing recipe and perhaps every fifth word and then tried to make that into a story. I look forward to recipes for unusual concoctions for all sorts of things that you can't actually make a recipe for. So the whole format of setting things out with ingredients and instructions and that sort of thing can be a fun way to write. So good luck with your writing, and I look forward to reading it all. Thank you very much.